Don't cry, mister. My daddy's gone too, but you can borrow my mom tonight. The snow had been falling over Maplewood Square for 3 hours straight, and it showed no signs of stopping. It was Christmas Eve, the kind of Christmas Eve that belonged on greeting cards and holiday movies, the kind where the street lamps cast golden halos through the falling white and the giant town. Christmas tree blazed with 1,000 warm lights, filling the square with a glow that made everything look like it had been dipped in something sacred. Every bench in Maplewood Square was empty tonight, every bench except one. Nathan Calloway, 38 years old, CEO of Calloway Capital, one of the most powerful private equity firms on the East Coast, sat completely motionless on that frozen park bench. His navy suit jacket was dusted white across the shoulders. His tie, a deep charcoal silk, hung slightly loosened at the collar. His watch, a $12,000 Rolex that his late wife Claire had placed on his wrist with shaking, emotional hands on their 5th wedding anniversary, caught the flickering glow of the Christmas tree lights and threw tiny gold reflections across the snow at his feet. He had been sitting there for over 40 minutes. He wasn't cold. He couldn't feel anything at all. 3 years ago on this exact night, Nathan Calloway's entire world had ended in a single phone call. Claire had gone out that afternoon for last-minute Christmas shopping. She'd kissed him on the cheek on her way out the door, laughing because she'd forgotten her list on the kitchen counter for the 3rd time that week. He'd called after her. "You don't need the list. You always remember everything anyway." And she'd turned in the doorway and grinned at him, that full, bright, completely unguarded grin that he had fallen in love with a decade earlier across a crowded coffee shop in Boston. "Save me some hot cocoa," she had said. "I'll be home by 8. She never made it home. A distracted driver ran a red light en route, and at 6:47 p.m., Claire's car was hit on the driver's side. She was gone before the ambulance arrived. The paramedics told him later that she likely hadn't felt any pain. They meant it as comfort. For a long time it didn't feel like any. In the back seat of Claire's car, among the scattered shopping bags and shattered glass, the first responders had found a small stuffed bear with a red ribbon tied around its neck. No name tag, no receipt, just a bear, soft and small and meant for someone who had never gotten the chance to exist. Claire had been 3 months pregnant. They hadn't told anyone yet. They had been waiting for Christmas Day to share the news. Nathan had never told another soul about that bear. He had taken it home from the hospital in a paper bag, put it on the shelf above the fireplace and left it there. It was still there now, 3 years later. In the house he still couldn't bring himself to sell. He built an empire in the years that followed. 14-hour days, hostile acquisitions, boardroom victories and Forbes covers and profile pieces in financial magazines with headlines like "The Man Who Turns Crisis into Capital." His partners admired his focus. His competitors feared his precision. His employees called him relentless. None of them knew he was just a man running fast enough to stay ahead of grief. But every December 24th, the running stopped. Every December 24th, he came back to this bench in Maplewood Square, because this was where he had been standing when his phone rang that night. 3 years ago, on his way to pick up a bottle of wine from the shop across the square, because this was the last place he had existed as the version of himself who still had everything. He came back every year, as if some part of him believed that if he sat still enough, long enough, in the right spot, something might be returned to him. Nothing ever was, until tonight. He heard the crunch of small boots in the snow before he saw her. A little girl, no older than 5, maybe just turned 5, and in a teal velvet Christmas dress with a white hem and a wide black sash around the waist. On her head, a chunky green knit hat pulled down over her ears, blonde pigtails escaping from beneath it on both sides. Her cheeks were the deep rose red of a child who had been out in the cold long enough to fully commit to it. Her front tooth was missing, that classic gap-toothed smile that belongs exclusively to 5-year-olds, who are absolutely delighted by their own temporary toothlessness. She was carrying a wrapped Christmas present with both hands, holding it the way children hold important things, slightly in front of her. With total, ceremonious attention, gold paper, a red bow on top slightly squashed on one side, she walked with the kind of fearless, unself-conscious confidence that only very small children and very certain adults ever manage, and she walked directly to Nathan's bench. She stopped in front of him, tilted her head, studied him with those big, serious blue eyes the way children study puzzles they fully intend to solve. Then she said with complete matter-of-fact directness, "You're crying." Nathan startled. He touched his face and realized she was right. He hadn't even noticed. He wiped his cheek quickly with the back of his hand and straightened up, falling automatically into the composed, polished posture he wore in every professional setting. "I'm fine," he said, producing the boardroom smile, practiced, reassuring, watertight. The little girl looked at the smile for exactly 1 second. She didn't buy it. "My daddy used to cry like that," she said, her voice dropping just slightly, the way children's voices do when they're saying something they've carried for a while, before he went to heaven. The boardroom smile dissolved. Nathan sat there, completely unable to speak, as this 5-year-old in a teal velvet dress looked at him with eyes that held, somehow, both deep innocence and something much older, the particular sorrow of a child who has learned too early that some people leave and don't come back. "He would sit like you're sitting," she continued thoughtfully, her head still tilted, "and he would look at the Christmas tree like it was hurting him. Mama said he was missing someone." A long moment passed. Snow fell between them. Then the little girl took one careful step forward and held out the wrapped gift, her gift, both hands extended, offered fully and without hesitation. "Here," she said simply. "This was supposed to be for my dad. I made it at school, but I think you need it more than heaven does." Nathan stared at that small gold package in those tiny, outstretched hands and felt something happen in his chest that 3 years of relentless forward motion had failed to prevent. Something cracked open, quietly and completely, in the place he'd spent 3 years walling off. "Sweetheart," he said carefully, his voice rougher than he expected, "I can't take your gift." "It's okay," she said patiently, still holding it out. "Mama says when someone is hurting, the right thing to do is give them something. She says that's what Christmas actually means, not the presents part, the giving when it's hard part." Nathan looked at this 5-year-old, this small, gap-toothed, completely earnest child standing in the snow on Christmas Eve, trying to give away her handmade gift to a stranger on a park bench because he looked sad, and he thought he had never in his life met anyone so purely, recklessly, beautifully generous. He was about to say something. He wasn't sure what, and when he heard quick footsteps in the snow behind her, "Lily, Lily, honey, you cannot just run off like—" A woman stopped short. She was wearing a deep burgundy wool coat, long and elegant, open over a green wrap dress, a canvas tote bag on one shoulder, blonde hair slightly wavy from the cold, falling around a face that was flushed and breathless and, in the next instant, wide-eyed with the particular expression of a mother who has just found her child standing in front of a stranger offering him a Christmas present. "Oh, goodness, Lily, come here, sweetheart." "Mama?" Lily said, utterly unbothered. Still holding out the gift, he said, like Daddy used to be. The word Daddy fell into the cold night air and stayed there. The woman, Sarah, Nathan would learn, went very still. She looked at her daughter, then she looked at Nathan. Really looked at him, the expensive suit, the loosened tie, the eyes that were red in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, the posture of a man who had constructed an entire fortress around himself and was sitting alone inside it on Christmas Eve because he didn't know what else to do. Sarah recognized it. She recognized it the way you recognize something you have seen every morning in your own mirror. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, reaching for Lily's shoulders. She has a very big heart. She doesn't always ask permission before she uses it. "Please don't apologize," Nathan said. He meant it completely. "She's the kindest person I've encountered in a long time." Lily looked up at her mother with an expression of pure, gap-toothed vindication. Sarah almost smiled despite herself. She studied Nathan for a moment, carefully, not intrusively, the way someone looks at a person when they're trying to decide whether to do the brave thing or the safe thing. She chose the brave thing. "There's a cafe right across the square," she said. "Fireplace hot cocoa, they do a Christmas Eve special. Lily and I were heading there. A beat. You're welcome to come. No expectations. Just it's Christmas Eve and nobody should sit alone in the snow. Nathan looked at this woman who had just lost her own husband, who was raising a daughter alone, who was probably carrying her own invisible weight of grief, and who was still, in the middle of all of that, turning around and offering warmth to a stranger. He almost said no. He nearly retreated into the comfortable, familiar fortress. Then Lily reached up and took his hand. She didn't ask. She didn't wait. She simply placed her small, warm fingers inside his large, cold ones, the way children do when they've decided something is settled, and began walking toward the cafe, with the total confidence of someone who has never once considered the possibility of being told no. Come on, mister, she said cheerfully. Mama's cocoa is better than the cafe's, but she says it's nice to let other people cook sometimes. I think that's about being tired, but she says it's about community. Behind Lily, Sarah caught Nathan's eyes and gave him a small, helpless shrug. This is just who she is, and the tiniest smile. Nathan let himself be led across the snowy square by a 5-year-old in a teal velvet dress. They stayed at that cafe for 2.5 hours. Lily installed herself between them in the corner booth like she had always sat there, immediately appropriating all the paper napkins to draw on and explaining to Nathan, with great seriousness and detail, the precise dietary preferences of Santa's reindeer. Carrots, she informed him, were non-negotiable. Cookies were fine but secondary. Rudolph specifically preferred baby carrots, which she pronounced the fancy ones. Nathan listened to all of it. Sarah watched him listen and felt something loosen in her own chest. The tight, careful vigilance that single mothers carry everywhere, always assessing, always protecting. Something about the way this man sat with her daughter, not performing interest, not condescending, just genuinely, quietly present, made the vigilance ease. Gradually, carefully, between Lily's artistic projects and cocoa refills, Sarah and Nathan began to talk. She had lost her husband David 18 months ago. Heart attack at 41, sudden, without warning. A Sunday morning that had started like every other Sunday morning and ended with a phone call from the hospital that split her life permanently into before and after. She had moved back to Maplewood from Chicago to be near her mother. She was rebuilding her accounting practice. She was doing okay most days. Christmas is harder, she said quietly, both hands wrapped around her mug while Lily focused intensely on drawing a reindeer with a disproportionately large red nose. Yeah, Nathan said. Just that. Just yeah. And somehow it was enough, because it came from someone who understood exactly what harder meant, not as sympathy, as shared geography. He told her about Claire then. Not everything, and not the bear, not yet, but enough. The phone call, the bench, the annual return to the place where before had ended. Sarah didn't say I'm sorry in the automatic, helpless way people do when they don't know what else to offer. She said, it makes sense that you go back. We need somewhere to put it. Nathan looked at her. Yeah, he said again. That's exactly it. When they finally stepped back out into the snow 2 hours later, the square was quiet. The Christmas tree still blazed beside the park bench. Lily, thoroughly full of cocoa and creatively spent, was leaning heavily against Sarah's side, eyes at half-mast, still clutching her slightly squashed gift. She had decided, after some deliberation, to keep it after all, but had promised Nathan she would make him one specifically. Which was, she explained. Even better, Nathan crouched down to her level in the snow. Hey, he said softly. Thank you for tonight. For coming over to that bench. You didn't have to do that. Lily opened one sleepy eye and regarded him. Did it help? She asked, completely direct. No artifice at all. Nathan looked at her, this 5-year-old, who had walked up to a grieving stranger on Christmas. He even offered him her handmade gift and then taken his hand and led him across the snow because it was simply the right thing to do. Yeah, Bug, he said, and his voice was steady and real. It really, really helped. She gave him the gap-toothed smile, full and satisfied, and closed her eye again. Sarah and Nathan stood in the snow for a moment after that, the comfortable, slightly tentative silence of two people who have shared something genuine and are figuring out what comes next. They exchange numbers, not with grand declarations, not with the breathless urgency of romantic movies, just with the quiet, honest acknowledgement that sometimes the universe is deliberate about who it places in your path, and it would be both foolish and ungrateful to pretend otherwise. "Take care of yourself, Nathan," she said, pulling Lily's hat down over her ears. "You too, Sarah," he said. He walked back across the square alone, but it felt different than it had an hour ago. The bench was just a bench now. The snow was just snow. The Christmas tree was just a Christmas tree, beautiful and bright. Not a monument to loss, just a tree covered in lights in the middle of a winter night. He texted her the next morning. "Merry Christmas. Thank you, both of you, for last night." Her reply came 3 minutes later. "Merry Christmas, Nathan. Lily wants you to know she has officially decided you're her friend. She's also already started on your gift. It involves glitter. I'm warning you now." He laughed. On Christmas morning, alone in his house, he laughed, genuinely, fully, from somewhere real and for the first time in 3 years. It wasn't a fairy tale. Real healing never is. It was coffee meetings that turned into long walks. It was Lily dragging Nathan to a February school art show with the iron confidence of someone who has decided a thing is happening. It was Sarah and Nathan sitting on a back porch one spring evening, not talking, just existing in the same space with the particular ease of two people who have stopped pretending to be fine and started actually becoming it. It was slow, it was careful, it was real, and it was built on a foundation that neither of them had planned for. A teal velvet dress, a red-bowed Christmas gift, and a 5-year-old with a gap-toothed smile who had looked at a grieving man on a park bench and seen, with perfect, uncomplicated clarity, exactly what he needed. The following Christmas Eve, there were 3 cups of cocoa on the table in the corner booth at the cafe, across from Maplewood Square. Lily sat between them, narrating the confirmed carrot preferences of each individual reindeer by name, drawing elaborate scenes on paper napkins, periodically checking that both adults were paying sufficient attention. Nathan looked across the booth at Sarah. She was already looking at him, outside through the cafe window. Snow fell on the empty park benches and the blazing Christmas tree and the bench where a man had sat, alone just 12 months ago, convinced that warmth was something that happened to other people. He reached across the table. Sarah took his hand. Lily, without looking up from her napkin reindeer, said, "Finally." Because sometimes grief doesn't end, it just finds company. And sometimes that company arrives in a green knit hat, carrying a squashed red bow, with a gap-toothed smile and the unshakable conviction that sad strangers on park benches deserve the same thing everyone deserves: someone to sit with. "Don't cry, mister. You can borrow my mom tonight."